as soon as the guy blew the whistle, we took off running. I went to slide behind the first piece of cover, and there was a bolt head that was sticking up out of the turf, and it just completely filleted my shin open down to the muscle. I was in one of my friend's like marine issued pants, so they were very sturdy, not meant to be cut, and you could just see like a little hole down near my shin, and I was like, ooh, that hurt more than the size of that hole.
From a fillet of leg to determining a bilateral butt-lift protocol, we exchange stories today with a recent PhD of physical therapy. Now imagine 20 years of schooling, becoming an inpatient and outpatient physical therapy doctor. Your location? A Veterans Administration hospital in Texas. On this podcast, we'll meet a talented young doctor who's practiced just under a year. With enthusiasm and passion, he dives headfirst into today's new and ever-changing frontier. He sources mentors, education, and the constant exchange of information to keep his clinical skills sharp and to serve patients across the continuum of care. This is Life's Learning Curve. Stand by. On today's podcast, we'll talk to Doctor of Physical Therapy, Trace McClintock. In 4 segments, we'll hear about segment 1, called I Moved a Lot. Dr. McClintock explains why before college his family moved 6 times. Segment 2, called Career Choices and Influencers. Dr. McClintock tells us just how he became a D.P.T. Segment 3, called Duck Legs and Whiskey Docs. Here the doctor finds an effective way to communicate to the PT world through blogs and podcasts. And finally, in segment 4, called Butt Lifts and Fillet of Leg, well, you're just going to have to listen to this one. Today, we're happy to be here with a doctor of physical therapy, a D.P.T., who's very focused on his own personal growth, and he embraces connecting with others in his profession and is prominent all over social media these days. He makes communication and learning cooperate. This is Dr. Trace McClintock, D.P.T. Hi, Trace.
Doing good, Paul. How are you doing today?
Great. What was life like growing up for you?
It was definitely an interesting childhood. My dad was Coast Guard growing up, so we moved around every 2 to 3 years. So we started out, I was born in Ohio and then moved to Bolingbrook, Illinois, and then we moved down to Puerto Rico where I started school. And then after that, we moved up to Wisconsin. So we went from the nice tropical weather of the island to that first year we were there, we got 56 inches of snow over a weekend, I think. But after Wisconsin, we moved to West Virginia. We were there for another 3 years and then settled down in Central Illinois my sophomore year of high school. It was difficult towards the end when we were in high school, and as we got older. When we were younger, basically sports played the bridging role when we moved to somewhere new. Luckily, me and my brother were both fairly decent at sports, and that was our biggest kind of bonding moment, I guess, for the kids around the neighborhood. We were able to play pickup games of basketball or football, or if it was baseball season, we were going to the park and playing there.
I assume your father's retired now. Where did you guys finally settle?
So we settled in Oakwood, Illinois. He retired in 2007, I believe. And he's been working with the VA ever since. He works in the safety department, does their fire safety code inspection.
What kind of kid were you in school?
It's interesting because I was kind of that hybrid between a jock and a nerd, because my parents definitely pushed, being good in school, getting good grades. If I got a B, it was never, we got talked down to or felt like we weren't good enough, but it was always did you give it your best? Is that the best you could have done, was get a B in that class? If it was, that's fine. But they knew most of the time, either we slacked off at one point. We were mostly, me and my brother were both A and B students, more A's than B's usually. But being in that kind of class. You didn't have the mixture of, the kids that you were playing sports with were also the kids you were in class with, because in our school, it had that stereotype of like the jocks, they were in the normal level classes. And then if you were in the accelerated classes, you weren't really playing too many sports, especially not football, baseball, basketball. It was more like the track and cross country kids were usually smarter doing those sports where they weren't having head trauma and things like that.
Why physical therapy? How did you find that career?
So I started off thinking I was going to go into pharmacy. Basically, when I had no idea what I wanted to do, I Googled top paying jobs with the most growth, and pharmacy popped up. And after I got into organic chemistry and working with the different drug names and interactions and all that, I realized that wasn't for me. I wanted to work more with people instead of pills. I got to work at the VA in Danville, and there I worked in their physical medicine and rehab services department. And through that, I got to work with chiropractic and physical therapy, occupational therapy, kinesiotherapy, their physiatrists, audiology, speech pathologists, kind of got to see the whole spectrum of rehab services. And I really liked the physical therapy team. It was one of the larger teams. They had more physical therapists on staff. But what really solidified it was when I went to U of I my first year. I got to go overseas and do like a mission trip with some health students. It was a bunch of public health and community health students and pre-med. And we went over there and opened up like a clinic with this doctor that we were staying with. And for one of the weeks we did that. And then the other week we got to bounce around between a couple other clinics, and the doctor knew a physiotherapist over there. And he let me shadow with him for a couple days, and just seeing how you don't need the like water treadmills and the robotic gear to get people up and moving. It's like you can make a lot of impact just helping people move and get out of pain in a very simple way, just kind of movement is medicine kind of approach. And that really kind of set it home for me. I love doing it. I love working with the physiotherapist there and seeing the impact you could make.
You must have met some great people while you were over there.
The number one thing, and this is one that I talked about during my PT school interviews, there was this kid he was in a car accident, and he was probably 18 or 19 at this time, and he wasn't able to communicate. He was nonverbal. He could still use his hands pretty good, actually. It wasn't too restricted.
Okay.
But he wasn't able to communicate, and the PT was focusing on, getting him to move a little bit better, kind of ADLs, which is taking care of things like washing yourself, brushing your teeth, things like that.
Day to day.
And as we kind of moved through and he was at the end of the session, he was like, is there anything else you think we could do with him? I've been working with him for about a year now, and we're kind of just maintenance at this point. And I was like, have you ever thought about doing sign language? And the PT was like, what do you mean? And said, he still can move his hands. Is he able to communicate? Like American Sign Language? And he's like, I never thought about that. I didn't ask him. So he pulled up on his phone, just like a YouTube video of American Sign Language, and showed him the letters of the name. And the kid was able to spell out his name through sign language. And you just saw a huge grin come on his face. He just smiled, and for the first time in a while, he was able to communicate with a purpose. And even though, he wasn't a pro at it, you could learn a couple letters to spell your name out.
He felt that payback.
Yeah. And it was instant. It was like, you can make that change really quick just on showing someone something that they don't know about. They don't know ways to communicate. You've never been exposed to it. And especially after a trauma, he probably had some sort of brain damage, which is why he was nonverbal, but he was able to understand, if I spell out these letters, that's my name. I can now communicate. And the PT was like, oh, this is something we can definitely work on.
That's a life-changing moment for him, and probably for you as well.
There's definitely been other times where it's like you make that instant change with somebody, but I'll never forget that being the first time. I'm sure, in teaching or something, you see that aha moment that a student gets, and where it just clicks.
It's very cool.
Yeah, it was something I had never experienced before.
Kids are pretty transparent for the most part, and they will, when they get something or understand something, or when they want more. They want enrichment. You can actually see it on their faces. Where I think as we get older, we tend to mask a lot of our feelings and how things are to us because we don't want to give away a lot of affect. But kids, boy, they'll let you know right away. You can see their eyebrows shoot up. It's like a cartoon. You worked jobs on the way to becoming a physical therapist, doctor of physical therapy, as we all have prior to our careers, and a lot of those jobs will impact us in certain ways that we don't expect. Can you think of a time or a story, a place you worked that impacted what you do today?
One was bartending and serving, and the other was actually my first job in high school, which was working on a horse farm. And the horse farm one just taught me like how to be humble. And reflecting back now, it's like I've done a lot worse stuff for a lot less pay. So it's, I mean, cleaning up after horses, moving them around, feeding them. And also you learn to respect like an animal of that size. Like people think if you've never worked with horses or you've just ridden them, it's like, oh, they're just an animal. But it's like those things are so powerful that you have to like respect what it is. But the serving and bartending definitely taught me like how to make that small talk, how to put the customer first, the customer's always right, and how to adjust and avoid confrontation when it arises sometimes, because
absolutely in a bar,
if it's your fault, then you know you're still the one that has to deal with it, whether it's as a physical therapist or as a server or bartender. If you know their food came out wrong, you weren't the one that did it, but you're the one that has to deal with it. If they're in pain, you're not the one that put them in pain, but you're the one that has to deal with it.
So much psychology in that when you're working in a bar and there's some alcohol involved, and this is also a college town, so University of Illinois, right?
Yep.
If you ran into any of your professors when you were going through your final phase of school, and you could speak to them about what you're doing right now, how you're actively engaged in the real world process of physical therapy, being a doctor of that, what might you tell them?
I'd first thank them for giving me all the knowledge that I now have clinically. But I'd also, probably talk with them because I'm sure they know more than they can tell us in class that you're not going to know everything. There are going to be those patients that it's not the way that they presented in the book. It's not, you couldn't have wrote a test question about it. There's no way to prepare for someone who's coming in after, having their leg amputated after a car accident. And how do you prepare for that? It's like when it's your first time, you just have to have that experience. Like there's no way to prep yourself or talk through or read about working with someone in that situation. It's just, you have to have that clinical experience with it. And I'd love to just bounce stories off of them and see, because they can teach you things from the book, but when you get into, just having a conversation about clinical experience, it opens up Pandora's box of everything that they've seen. And some of my professors have been practicing physical therapy longer than I've been alive.
That leads me to the next phase of what I want to talk to you about, and that's your social media communication you do. And one of the things that you do very well is communicate using a blog called Physio for You. I've read almost all your blogs, and even though I'm not a doctor of physical therapy, I like the way you write. I like the way that you lay things out. There's always a beginning, a middle, and kind of a hook in there. From reading your blog, I know you have kind of a soft spot for veterans because of your father's service.
Yeah, that's my dad's service, my grandpa's service. Growing up, being like a military brat, we grew up around everyone who was serving, whether it be Coast Guard or Army or Navy, whoever it was. It seemed like everyone that my parents knew were serving our country. They were all veterans, or active duty. So it definitely is a population I enjoy working with. And most of my patients are not the typical people you think about that are going to see a physical therapist. It's not someone who rolled their ankle or had an ACL surgery. A lot of it is either chronic pain or they had been jumping out of planes for 20 years and now their knees hurt. And it's just a very complicated patient population, but it's one that's very rewarding when you get it like when you get it just right and you're able to help that person,
Yeah.
that there's nothing really like it.
Well, part of that's getting old too. I mean, what you're talking about is, of course, is like they've been jumping out of planes their whole lives, and something tells me you didn't just make that up. That you've come across somebody who's done that. As people age, it becomes a little bit harder to do this or that. One day you wake up and all of a sudden there's a pain.
And that's the important part, is just kind of keeping up with the exercises, like keeping moving, because sometimes people want the quick fix, and then when it goes away and it comes back, they're almost teaching people that the body's resilient as long as you treat it properly. As long as you're moving well, eating right, sleeping, and you're not like overly stressed, the body can handle a lot of things. But if you're not treating it right and all these things are going downhill, then you might have some pains. And I mean, if you're 85 or something and you have a little bit of back pain, if it's not stopping you from doing what you're doing, it's not that big of a deal. It's just kind of not letting it slow you down is the biggest thing.
Some of your blogs that I liked, here's a title I liked: Top 3 Reasons for Not Seeing a Physical Therapist Over the Holidays. Another one: Why you should be skeptical of everything you learn in PT school. And my favorite so far has been the blog, and I don't have a title for it, but I remember you writing about coming out and greeting your patients in the waiting room, not having the patients be brought to you, or you come into the room later after they've been placed there. And I think that's just great, because I in my personal experience, I see a lack of connection sometimes between doctors and their patients.
Yeah, so I would say all of that really relates to like the customer service aspect of physical therapy that people miss out on. And if you think going back to like serving and bartending, all 3 of those are like things you could look back on, like top 3 reasons for not seeing a physical therapist. It's just, reasons for not going to a restaurant. Either you've heard something is bad about it, you've heard something else is bad, or it's going to take too much time to go out of your way. Like, you have to address the people where they're at, teach them why your business is worth coming to. Reason for being a skeptic, just like, again, with food service, if you're the owner of something and your food is no good, but you think it's the best, the market doesn't lie. So it's the same way with physical therapy research is, if you think your method of whether it's massage or ultrasound or electrical stimulation, if you think it's the cure-all, but the research is showing it's not, then you have to be skeptical of it, of like, maybe you're just getting some anecdotal evidence. And then the last one of greeting patients at the door, I think that's huge. And if, hopefully everyone can have time to do that, because you're making that first impression. If I can meet you at the door or in the waiting room, shake your hand, look you in the eye, and ask you how your day or your weekend is, or if it's not the first visit even, I'm asking you about, your kids or your family, or how the game was this weekend. And it's just getting on a personal level. Oh yeah, that's my favorite little trick also as well with, if you're going out to the waiting room to greet them, they're not really thinking that they're under the microscope yet. So you can see how they're sitting in their chair. You can see how they get up when you first call their name, and then as they start walking back, when they're not thinking about it. Because there's a big difference between let's walk back to the waiting room and here, I'm going to analyze your gait, take 10 steps for me, turn around, come back.
Hey, did you grow up with a dad who told you to stand up straight all the time?
I got more of the uncross your arms because you look like you're closed off. I would always sit there and kind of just act like I was paying attention, but he said that's just bad body language. You look like you're closed off, like you're not paying attention.
Interesting. On your blog, you've called yourself a skeptic, and you brought this up a few minutes ago. Where did that come from? Or what are you saying?
That blog was co-written by one of my classmates, and he wrote a big chunk of it, and I, agreed with it. We talked about it. And we were just having a conversation of where a lot of the things that are taught in school aren't necessarily best practice anymore, but that's what's on the boards. So you have to study to get your license, and then just accept that some of the things you learn aren't necessarily best practice. They've been proven even not to work sometimes, and we're still learning them. So if you take everything as, well, the book said this, it's like the book could be 10 years old since it was copywritten. Got to look more at the articles, and it's also real easy to go down rabbit holes of research when you Google like why is this intervention effective? You're just going to get positive kind of results. Whereas if you Google, why is this intervention not effective?
So stay curious, stay curious, keep learning, basically, and keep an open mind as well. I want to ask you about free time. You went to school for 20 years, and it was intense, and it was the same pattern for a long time. 20 years is a long time to go to school under that same pattern. So now that you are a doctor and you're practicing and you're working, you probably sometimes find yourself with some free time. Have you learned to adjust to that?
Still definitely adjusting, because even when I first started practicing, I was still studying for the board. So it's only been maybe 5 months since I've passed the boards, 5 or 6 months since I passed the boards. And it's not bad through the week. Through the week, usually with the commute, and by the time you get home and work out and make dinner, it's time to wind down a little bit, and that's not bad. But the weekends is definitely where finding time to fill your schedule, or finding something to fill your schedule is difficult sometimes, because you don't have homework. There's not anyone pressing you to write a paper or do anything that you don't want to do. I've really filled it with podcasting, kind of like we had talked about, writing blogs, and then we just got 2 kittens, so those are taking up some time now as well.
As long as you don't start writing blogs about the kittens, I'm okay with it all.
Oh, we might. There might be one in the works.
So get back to writing. When did you find out that there was a writer in there? I really like how you write. Obviously, I cannot keep up with the content at the level that you're at, but I like how you write. Where did that come from?
Oh, probably from my junior year journalism class. If you would have told, 3rd grade me that I would be writing for fun in my free time, he would have thought you were crazy. I was awful at writing. I had bad handwriting. I didn't really enjoy reading things that were assigned. I like fictional reading. But in journalism, I learned to write with a purpose and write succinct. So I wasn't having to just write educational papers. We could do columns, write about things that were on our mind, kind of use it as an outlet. And through PT school, that really helped. It was something that I could use to veer away from the grind of anatomy and physiology and pharmacology, and all these heavy level sciences. Is like some of my first ones were talking about different podcasts to listen to, and it gives me an excuse to go listen to a bunch of podcasts. And it an outlet to just, and I always try to write like I'm writing to my friends, basically, because I'd rather someone show me on a video or talk through it in a page or 2. I don't need to read 50 pages on something that, you could have summed it up a lot quicker. So that's how I try to write now.
Well, I think a lot of colleges like that anyway, where, my experience in college is you'd come out of a 3-hour class and go, man, I think I could have taught that in about 15 minutes. Well, there were those years I went to, there's undergraduate school, I went to graduate school, I went to postgraduate school, and it got to the point where I realized I didn't need to keep going, but I did. I got all the way up to writing my doctoral thesis, and my first child was born, and I thought, well, that's way more important than writing a paper. And I like to write. I love to write, and at this point in my life I like doing research and things like that too, but at that point it was more creative. So I stopped, and I never went back, and I don't regret it. The time should be spent more with the people than the paper.
And you even found out that you enjoyed doing like more of the video editing, because I've seen some of you've done before. How did you, because this was back in the 90s before people, like I've seen my parents' videos, and it's it's kind of just them holding a camera real shaky, and you're seemingly pretty crisp. How'd you get into like that as a hobby?
As a kid, I used to write stories, mostly nonfiction stuff about my family, and exaggerate things, about just odd, quirky things my grandma, my mom, my sister, my dad, or me, we all said and did, and how it went from point A to point B. And I would write these stories out, and as I was writing them, I wanted to illustrate it, so I would draw a cartoon that went with this. And while I was drawing the cartoon, I kept thinking, I can't wait to get back to writing. So I'd get back to writing. And as I was writing, I think, I can't wait to get back to drawing a cartoon on it. So it went back and forth. But I wasn't that great at cartooning. And I liked it. When I got to the age where consumer video products started coming out, I needed a camera. I mean, I saved all the money I could, bought a consumer video camera and started shooting. And that was the point when I began to put those two elements together. It just hadn't been in place yet. So I always thought in terms of shots. I always have shots. That's something different to a bartender. I always thought in terms of shots of shooting with a camera. Of I want this, then I want this, then I know I need a long shot here. I can't stop doing that. It's just something I've done since I've been a kid. I like playing music and play out music. You'll see that in this podcast. I just like doing it. And then it's putting together a product that other people can sit down and watch and enjoy or critique, whatever they want to do. It makes me happy. It makes me feel good. So.
The beach. And do you know what?
What?
Platypus kids can't go in the water because you know why?
Why?
They may go far away and you can't get them because you know why?
Why?
You'll go. Bamboo.
Here's to you.
Here's to you. Back to the gold bar. My home movies are like little individual productions of my daughter's being born, my daughter's first birthday, shoving cake in her face, and all the relatives are there. You see them. There's music that goes with it. So I like the full production thing. And we're in an age right now where everything's kind of underproduced, as far as I'm concerned, or it's drag and drop. I decided I'm sticking with the production stuff. I like things produced well. That's just me. Overall, social media, how does that fit into your physical therapy practice, and what's the response been?
So for me, it doesn't play as big of a role right now. With me working at the VA, it's not like we're direct marketing to doctors or consumers because our patients have to be veterans. Right. They have to be referred to us from the VA doctors. But there is a big push now for physical therapy to become direct access, meaning you can go to your local clinic, walk in and say, I have back pain, and they can treat you. They can see you. And it's still kind of becoming widespread. Most states have at least some sort of direct access now. At least you can do an eval and then you may need a doctor's note, but you can walk in and see a physical therapist right off of the street. So in Illinois, they've recently approved it within the last year. Texas, we're still working on it. But there's a big push too with like cash-based physical therapy because with the way insurance companies are, people are charged and overcharged. And if you don't pay your deductible, then you're basically doing cash PT anyways. So people are trying to get in for 5 or 6 visits where they wouldn't have even reached their deductible yet and making people better quicker. There's more of a push towards, doing that evidence-informed practice where you're not just seeing someone because your insurance is paying for it. It's more to make you better. So the only way to really reach a large scale of customers these days is social media. If you're relying on the local newspaper and commercials, you're kind of behind the game now because there's like DVR to fast forward through the commercials. No one watches them. Yeah. I can't remember when I've seen someone under the age of 50 looking at a newspaper recently.
I think it's kind of fun when you do see somebody looking at a paper though.
Yeah. It's
like it's a throwback. It's cool.
Yeah. But now it's like, you can boost your Facebook post for $20 and it even shows like your reach is 2,500 people or more. And it's like, you're not going to get that investment from doing a print based ad. So if you're not out there kind of hustling with social media, you're missing out on a lot of potential customers. Because even with social media, you can focus who you want your message to go to. Like if you're trying to work with people who are ages 40 to 65 in the greater Chicago area, you can focus that way.
Instagram in particular is really stepping up these days.
how to utilize the hashtags, because you can reach so many people as long as you're doing it properly.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be anyone that you're friends with or following or anything like that. Your ability to reach out is so much more on Instagram and Twitter and things like that.
Have you had anybody reach out to you after you've posted a podcast or a blog and responded in an interesting or unusual manner? Not unusual, but just a response.
Yeah,
Good response.
more for Duck Legs, because we've been doing it for 2 years, a little bit over 2 years now.
Okay, and Duck Legs is another podcast that is done by you and a other group of people. Is that correct?
Yeah, me and 2 other guys.
Oh, okay.
In Austin. It's more interview based, so
Okay.
we focus on kind of talking to the bigger names in the physical therapy field about a wide spectrum of things, from geriatric and the older adult to pediatrics to women's health, everything.
Your podcast, the one that you have most recently put up this year, is called Whiskey Docs. Whiskey Docs. First of all, where can we find it?
So you can find it on anywhere where you're listening to this podcast at, pretty much. Spotify, Google Play, iTunes, or the Apple Podcast. It's off of Buzzsprout if you're looking at their platform.
But what was the inception of that?
So it was actually from when we were in PT school, me and my co-host Dylan. We were roommates, and it started just us. There was one weekend where the other 2 roommates were away, went back home or something, and we were just having a couple drinks and talking, and it's like, we should start a podcast. I think we were playing FIFA and just kind of hanging out. And in school we didn't really have time where we wanted to actually start the podcast, and we didn't really know what we were doing. But kind of like you said, once we graduated and we didn't have to study as much and we had more free time, it's like, why don't we do this thing? Like, there's a need for people learning about what physical therapists do, what to do when they are in pain, even though we're not giving like specific advice. It's kind of a general thing that, at least if people know that physical therapy can treat these kind of things, that's a big step in the right direction.
Sure.
And then also keeping it lighthearted, with both of us are big fans of whiskey and bourbon and trying different things. And we're always going to different bars or distilleries. But we're trying to get better at it, trying to keep it just base level. Here's what we're seeing. Here's what we do. Here's some whiskeys that you guys may try if you like certain things. So.
Yeah. Well, wait, so where did you develop an appreciation for whiskey? I mean, you did slightly answer that there, but why whiskey, and where did it all come from?
So it actually started when I was in undergrad, and I didn't really like beer. A lot of people were, have a beer with the boys, and you can have a beer after a hard test, and I just didn't like drinking it. I don't still really like light or anything like that, and I didn't know craft beers were a thing. Started trying different spirits, vodka, rum, whatever. And whiskey just has something that what I really liked about it is, after 1 or 2, if you notice you start not tasting it as much, that's where it's time to slow down. Whereas like the vodka and things like that you can hide with mixers, it's too easy to, if you're not being careful with it, in college, it can go downhill quick. Whereas whiskey, it's like, I'm throwing a couple back, I'm not tasting it anymore. I need to have a water, need to slow down a bit, and you can kind of control yourself. And I like the flavor of it. There's so many different types between, like a bourbon doesn't taste like, a Scotch or an Irish whiskey. To say that someone doesn't like whiskey, I think they haven't tried the right stuff for them, especially now that they're flavoring it. You can get peach whiskeys and blackberry and different fruity flavors that are good. So
yeah, and that's one of the great things about your podcast too, is you don't you take yourself seriously. You talk. It's like 2 guys sitting talking after a day at work and just relaxing and kind of kicking back. And I like that premise. Or what do you do with patients that don't follow through? They come to see you, but they don't maybe do the stretches or whatever you ask them to do.
Yeah, so at that point, I kind of feel like it was on me most of the time. that I didn't explain it well enough. We didn't get the patient buy-in first visit. If we had shown that what they were doing was going to improve them, typically patients continue to do it. Though I did just have a patient who, in session, she had pain down into her calf for 6 months. I noticed she was a little laterally shifted, which is just something in the spine. So the back was playing a role into the calf pain. We corrected the shift and her pain went completely away that she'd had for 6 months. And we saw her the next week and I was like, have you been doing your exercises? She was like, no, I went for a run this weekend though and ran 12 miles and I didn't have any pain, but now it's kind of starting to come back. I was like, but you didn't do any of your exercises. No. It's like, so with the exercises you felt better and without them you feel worse. It's like, what do we need to do? She's like, yeah, I need to do the exercises. So it's painting that picture and getting a good patient buy-in, because I mean, if they're not buying what I'm selling, then I didn't do my job if we're trying to make them better.
We recently put out a podcast that had within its title Bilateral Butt-Lift Physical Therapy Protocol of some kind, something like that. Here's a clip from that podcast.
Is that allowed? I don't know what the precautions are for a bilateral butt lift plastic surgery. Is there like shear force stuff when I'm doing a transfer that I need to worry about? And so I'm like, hold on. I go down and like call the inpatient PT that I know, give her a call, and I'm like, hey, remember when you jokingly said like, unless there's a stat consult? Well, they put in a stat consult, so now I have to do this eval. And what do I do for a bilateral butt lift? I've never seen this before. And she was like, do we do that at our hospital? I was like, you gotta be kidding me.
That was a clip from the podcast Whiskey Docs.
For the full story, they'll want to check out the Whiskey Docs podcast.
Right. Incidentally, if anything ever happens to Whiskey Docs and it goes under for some reason, a new title for a new podcast might be Bilateral Butt Lift.
We'll have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, please do.
911, what's your emergency?
You have a great story about attending a bachelor party and an injury that took place.
Yeah, this last year in June, I believe. Yeah, June. We were at a bachelor party. I was the best man of the wedding. It was very first sober bachelor party that I had been in. Or been a part of, and we were playing paintball. Everything was going good. We played for like 2.5 hours. It was the very last match of the day. We were running out of paint, so we were just kind of using the last bit of paint, getting ready to get out of there. And we were playing speedball, so it's on a nice AstroTurf field. Clean cut. It's not like we were running through the woods like we were previously, where you have to worry about rocks or trees or holes or anything like that. It was all, turf field, looked clean. And as soon as the guy blew the whistle, we took off running. I went to slide behind the first piece of cover, and there was a bolt head that was sticking up out of the turf, and it just completely filleted my shin open down to the muscle. I was in one of my friend's like marine issued pants, so they were very sturdy, not meant to be cut. And you could just see like a little hole down near my shin, and I was like, ooh, that hurt more than the size of that hole. And then I started noticing the blood soaking the pant leg, and so I rolled it up trying to see what I could see. And as I got up to like the middle of my leg, I just noticed yellow tissue. And having a background in cadaver labs and physiology and anatomy, I was like, that is fat tissue, that's not good. So I laid there, we called, I was like, stop, we got to stop the match. And they finally did. They came over to me, and the groom of the wedding was like, oh, are you all right? I was like, no, we're going to have to go to the hospital. So he went to cut the pants, because we had like a Leatherman kind of knife sort of thing, where it's like the all tool, and he stuck it in the hole and went to cut the first time. And because they were combat pants, they're not meant to be cut. So he slipped with the knife, and I was like, stop. I don't need a knife wound on top of this. Hold on a second. So just take the pants off in the middle of the field. And so I'm laying in my boxers. And at that point, when the pants uncovered all of it, it was like ooh, yeah, someone go get a car. We got to go to the hospital.
Yeah.
Because they were like, do you want us to call an ambulance? I was like, no, it doesn't hurt that bad right now. And I'm not bleeding a whole lot now because we had it elevated. We had it tourniqueted.
Okay.
So it was like,
Wow.
we can get this in a car. So my brother got his car backed up onto the field. We got back in and we're driving all the way there. And my brother, he's an engineer, has no background in anything medical. He looks back and hands me a water bottle. And I was like, what is this for? He's like, I don't know anything about this, but it's probably good to be hydrated. I don't know. It's like, thanks. You're probably right. I guess I should drink some water.
Was it hard to be diagnostic when it was about yourself?
Surprisingly, no. It actually, I think, helped a lot that I was able to be like, yes, this is trauma. No, it's not too bad. I know I can still move my ankle, so that's good. And it was the first thing I thought about, which was weird. So it, I think, helped in that situation because as we were getting ready to get me into the car as well, they were like, all right, we'll lift you into the car. And I was like, no, don't do that. It's going to extend my leg. That's going to hurt. Here, just hold on. And I like scooted back to the car and used my arms and my good leg to prop it up and get in the car.
Wow.
We got to the ER. The nurse there was like, oh, she was typing on her computer and was like, what are you name and what are you here for? And I was like, Trace McClintock. And she still wasn't looking up. And I was like, I got a really bad headache. And she looks up from the computer kind of concerned. And then she looks down as I'm sitting there in a wheelchair without my pants on with a huge cut on my leg. And she's like, oh, all right, we'll get you in. Hold on a second. So they got me back. It was great. It took like 3 hours. I was stitched up. Yeah. Was able to walk out of the hospital.
Really? I saw the photo, the stitched up photo of the, they put staples in, is that correct?
They put stitches as a top layer and stitches as a bottom layer. So it wasn't stapled, but stitched up.
Well, I saw that one, and I had heard you don't want to see the picture of the filleted leg. And it was probably 3 to 4 weeks later, it came up online as a viral photo. It wasn't even attached to you anymore, but there was your leg online and making its way around the world of your filleted leg. So congratulations, You're well known for that, I guess.
Yeah, on Twitter we got 175,000 retweets, I think. So that's a decent amount of people.
There you go. Man, if only you'd connected Whiskey Docs to that one.
I know.
If you could go back to age 10, 11, 12, what would you tell yourself about your future?
Oh, I would probably say try to listen to my parents a little bit more. And if I thought something was going to get me in trouble, probably should not do it. Because I've only done a few dumb things in high school and early college. Yeah. And every time I tried it, I got caught. Yeah. So there's only been 2 or 3 things, but I got caught on all of them. So nothing major. Doing all right now. Definitely as I get older, I realize what my parents were telling me was for the best. Right. But as a kid, you're not going to listen to everything your parents say. So.
No. Well, Trace, thank you for being here today. I appreciate it, and look forward to your future podcasts and blogs.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Sure. Dr. Trace McClintock has many great things yet to come. After multiple moves as a child and sports being used as a way to acclimate with new friends, family support, and even a filleted leg along the way, life does throw us all a learning curve. Because he keeps it positive, Dr. McClintock is truly thankful for all of life's experiences thus far, whether it be from family, professors, patients, friends, or even horses, the time he worked at a horse farm. Everyone and everything has played a role. Learning does not ever stop, ever. Now, Dr. McClintock told me before our show today, if there's one thing I know for sure, it's that I'm going to keep grinding it out every day so that I can hopefully make a positive impact on my profession and the people who care about me. Dr. Trace McClintock, a lifelong learner. For Life's Learning Curve, I'm Paul Hart. Today's podcast is not medical advice, but was meant for entertainment and slight educational purposes. Find Whiskey Docs on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Play. Our show is stitched together by producer Paul Hart, with assistance by Charlie Lyons, Chris Emanuel, and St. Dog. We're mixed by Heidi Cerner, technical director John Fike. As always, musical assistance by Riley Hart. On this show, special thanks to Trace McClintock, D.P.T., and all of the good people at Whiskey Docs Podcast out of Austin, Texas. Visit our website, lifeslearningcurve.buzzsprout.com. Don't forget to choose the like or subscribe button. I'm Paul Hart, and we will be back soon with more stories from Life's Learning Curve. We're clear.